The World Health Organization says that the end of the COVID-19 pandemic is on the horizon. The WHO will convene experts in October to determine whether COVID-19 can still be considered a public health emergency of international concern.
Abot kamay na raw ang katapusan ng COVID-19 pandemic. Yan ay ayon sa World Health Organization. Pababa na raw kasi ang mga kaso ng COVID-19 sa buong mundo.
Last week, the number of global weekly deaths stood at about 11,000, the lowest since March 2020.
We can see the finish line. We are in a winning position, but now is the worst time to stop running. Now is the time to run harder and make sure we cross the line and reap the rewards of all our hard work.
We're not there yet, but the end of COVID supposedly is in sight. So says the World Health Organization, but still with a warning that nations cannot let their guard down yet. What does this WHO declaration mean for the COVID fight back here at home? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Joining me via Zoom is Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5. LCV, good evening.
Hello, Robbie. Good evening.
Oh,
Hi.
malapit na raw ang finish line.
It's
Natatanaw
just
na
the
raw.
two of us tonight.
Oh, natatanaw na raw
I
ang finish line.
know. And to think this is coming from the World Health Organization, di ba? I mean, it has been so cautious all this time of the pandemic, right? And even when everybody was talking already about ano ba yan, endemicity, sila talagang talagang I mean, taking a hard line na parang it's still here, it's still here, it's still here. So to hear them say, di ba, we're seeing the finish line. Gandang balita yun.
Oh, I mean, certainly, I mean, nadali mo, di ba? The fact that this is coming from the WHO, allowing itself a little, I mean, not just a little, but some optimism. Even kanina kausap ko si Father Nico Striaco, di ba? Really, something quite daring for them to say, given that they're the ones also reminding na hindi pa tapos to, and di ba, there could be a retreat down the line if we bungle this.
That's why we shouldn't bungle it. Ayan na, tanungin natin ang ating guest. If there's any way to bungle this.
But we'll get to our guest later on. And before we do go to our guest and take a break, also to emphasize, the WHO is saying that the light at the end of the tunnel does not necessarily mean na mawawala ang COVID. It just may mean that we can maybe start dreaming of living with the virus without us dying. So they're saying still mind the protocols, still be careful, still vaccinate. Now, later on, we speak to our first guest after a short break. Keep it right here on One News. Thanks for staying with us. You're still here on One News, and this is the Chiefs. The WHO says it finally sees the light at the end of the tunnel, sabi nila, when it comes to the pandemic. What does this mean for our country, for businesses that have been totally disrupted in the Philippines and worldwide? Let's ask Go Negosyo founder Joey Concepcion. He's joining us via Zoom. Mr. Concepcion, welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, Roby, and good evening, Luchi.
Well,
Sir.
Mr. Concepcion, I'm sure you saw the statement of Mr. Ghebreyesus from the WHO. What were your impressions? What were your initial thoughts hearing this from the WHO, allowing themselves a little bit of optimism?
Well, it's good that we're moving forward. Hopefully, our medical doctors are able to see that same light, no? And I created this advisory council of experts. So we normally have a lively discussion with our doctors who have advised us quite well. And of course, the issue on mandatory masking and its removal is something that they don't agree, no? But as you know, our view has been that it's about time.
But when the WHO says...
hopefully, you use the word hopefully, no? So do I take it that from your point of view, our doctors here are even more conservative than the World Health Organization, or are they more cautious?
Well, yeah, some of them are, and I understand their concern is basically that their doctors, they are concerned with their patients and they want to make sure that they are safe. But on the other hand, I think we realized in the last 2 years and that how to live with COVID, and some people will get sick. It's a matter of level of risk that one wants to take. What has happened is that the mandate on vaccine has been removed, and now the mandate on mask has been removed for outdoors. So it is not masking that is removed, it is just the mandate, giving more people the freedom of choice. Right now, even if we want to drag the people to the vaccination centers for boosters, it's going to be a struggle. And they made a decision. Some of them just don't want to take the boosters because they think they can withstand Omicron, which is mild, and just go through it and develop natural immunity. So you can't force people when they don't want to do it. So we have to really move on and accept the fact that there are some people who would like to take that risk. And of course, there are others who will not take that risk. So I think, and I'm glad that WHO has made that statement, and that will really strengthen the position that we really have to move on. It's about time.
But Mr. Concepcion, I mean, yes, we are all looking forward, but just take a moment to look back as well. One of the early lessons for everyone was it's not just about your individual prerogative or your individual standpoint. The reality is individual standpoints multiplied over 100 million people could also redound to, public health services being overwhelmed and so on. Or with the WHO saying this and with the numbers that you're seeing with our vaccination, do you think we're past that? We're past the risk, not to individuals, but to the public health systems of the country?
Well, you can see the level of infection has gone really up. And despite that, our healthcare utilization rate is quite low. It's in the 30s and below the 30s. So things have changed. Now, if we were with the previous variants, Alpha, Delta, and Beta, that would be a different story. But Omicron has proven to be mild. Of course, those who are immunocompromised and the seniors are at a higher risk level. And these are the people that we have to protect. And that's why if they are free to wear the mask all the way through, because of their risk level. But we cannot hold the entire nation to certain protocols that I feel that can be removed already now, and we have to learn to live with the virus. I mean, it's been around for a couple of years now, so and there's no such thing. I mean, Secretary Maynard Guevara way back then removed the mandate on vaccination. So there's not much we can do here. We have done all the convincing. You've seen our programs with the private sector and the public sector. But still people are now resisting taking those boosters. No.
As far as masks go, do you think that this is a good first step, actually, and that removing the mask mandate for outdoors? However, the doctors are cautious about removing the mask indoors, and especially among students and the youth. No, what will be the residual effect of this mask mandate, so to speak? At the very least, it's loosened already as far as business goes. What bad effect does it still have? That you want it, ideally completely removed?
Well, for now, I think indoor masking may have to stay because of the level of infection, and there's no push towards that. Although we look at some of the ASEAN countries like Singapore, they've even removed indoor masking. Many other countries in Europe have taken it out totally. America, I've been traveling there back and forth, and there is no mask indoor and outdoor. But in the Philippines, I think it's worth pushing for the removal of the mandate outdoor. I feel that one sector that has been greatly affected, and I've been saying this, is our tourism sector. And if you're going to mandate masking in our resorts, the beaches, and all of that, we're now competing with a lot of tourists. Wanting to travel, and they'll choose Thailand and other countries over the Philippines. And you want to see the Filipinos smile, and I've always been sharing this with many people. Our greatest asset is our, hospitality and that smile. And you won't go to a beach with lots of people wearing a mask. And what is the risk of wearing a mask? You'll be coming out with a mark in your face with that mask because of the sunburn. No? So I find it really, we just have, what are the risks outdoor? No? Japan has been using masks for so many years when we were going there, but they still got the worst of COVID.
But anyway, we'll seize on that to really focus on the economic side of this conversation. Anyway, you started off on tourism. Maybe you could expound a little bit more on what's happening to the tourism sector at this point, and what's happening to the entire economy.
Well, let's put it this way. The rising prices is basically because of what happened in Ukraine and Russia. And that's causing a very high inflation. And America is really not going to allow it. No? They're going to be aggressively increasing rates. No? So not only that we have rising prices of commodities, and it's continuing to be that way, even power, fuel, etc., there is nothing that is not rising. You've got rising interest rates, and people have working capital. They borrowed money the second time around because the pandemic has wiped their first capital, especially our micro entrepreneurs. The banks have refinanced them, basically the microfinance institutions. And of course now, with rising rates, they're going to feel the pinch. And they still have to service their debt level. No? So not only that, the Filipino people have bought homes, no? Condominiums and all of that. And so this was never anticipated. No? So you're now seeing inflation, basically. You're seeing higher interest rates. And you're seeing a weakening of the Philippine peso, basically because of the strong performance of the US dollar because of they're aggressively increasing. So when will this end? No? We as manufacturers, we cannot pass all the increases to the consumers because they will just slow down buying, and that will be even worse for most of us. And that's what we don't want to see, no? A slowdown in the economy, which will lead to what they call stagflation. So that's that is the dark side that we can't get there, no? And I'm still very optimistic that by moving forward, learning to live with COVID, and just each one protecting themselves, we should just look at this current problem and ensure that everybody makes it through this crisis. No, it's not a crisis in health anymore. No, it's not still, it's not yet an economic crisis. But if we don't manage it well, it can get to that. No?
But how do we prepare ourselves? I mean, given that we're going to be loosening all of these mandates pretty soon, there must be something, at least a baseline by which we must live by, because we can't go back to the normal that we knew before the pandemic. For example, should we be stocking up on certain medications for COVID, and businesses, should they be adjusting or adapting to the new environment, which is a post-pandemic environment? What kind of adjustments will we need to do given this new environment?
Well, despite the poor uptake on booster shots, we should still push hard for that, no? Because that will ensure that people will get protected with a waning immunity. And the second thing is that we really have to stock up on our antiviral medicines. We have a lot of molnupiravir, which is more affordable, but Paxlovid, we are out of stock. No? And I've talked to Zwelig. They're expecting the delivery. They were expecting it this month, but it's been pushed to October. There's a huge demand for Paxlovid. And this is a very effective drug, especially for the elderly. The ones that we really have to protect here are those 60 years old and above, and especially those who are immunocompromised. So that I'm one of those. No? But then again, these are things that we will have to do. And moving forward, the president will extend the state of public health emergency, which is good. It will buy us time to ensure that the emergency use authority, eventually this has to be passed on to the vaccine manufacturers, which basically they should apply for certificate of product registry so that they can sell these vaccines directly to the private sector. So down the road, I think we should unburden the government of spending too much on this pandemic. Our debt has gone up because of this pandemic.
And of course, sir, your conversations with the president go beyond the public health concerns. You are a member of the Private Sector Advisory Council. Maybe you could talk to us and give us some updates on the conversations the private sector has been having with Malacanang, with the government, and what are the particular areas of concern or concentration that your conversations have focused on?
Well, I'm the lead for jobs in the Private Sector Advisory Council, so that's my focus together with six members, Tessie, Kevin, and Lance Cockway. So it's a group that's really working very hard. And how do we generate jobs in a time like this? And we've seen that MSMEs contribute at least 60+% to job generation. And that's a huge number. And how do we increase that number is to get them to scale up. And we have launched with the president last August 26, Kapatid Angat Lahat. It's really getting the private sector, the big companies, to really go down and help our MSMEs, making them part of the value chain. That's one. Mentoring, providing them access to money and market through digitalization. So many aspects, and it's really creating a more inclusive economy for our MSMEs. If we're able to do that, then they can grow, become small, medium, and they can hire more people. So they contribute 60+%. And the top two there is basically agriculture and retail that contribute a lot.
It's budget season, of course, in Congress. We're preparing for the budget of the national government. And from what you've seen, do we see those priorities reflected in the budget?
Well, I'm sure they will have to spend wisely. I mean, we are getting to that point of leveraging up. And what you don't want to see is a slowdown in the economy. It's like my company, I borrowed so much money for CAPEX to build my factories and all of that. And I expect that, my growth will continue. But if that growth reverses, then that's not good. Because how will you finance and pay your obligations? So that becomes a challenging situation. And that's why this early, the president is really very much forward-looking in the sense that we cannot have lockdowns anymore. We have to just manage to live with this COVID virus and allow the economy fully open and bring back whatever sector is not contributing, especially the tourism sector. Now, I talk about tourism because there is a revenge travel. Everybody's traveling all over the world. People want to travel because they've been stuck at home, stuck in their country for so long. So there's so much revenues that we can generate out of this, and a lot of MSMEs depend on our tourism. So we have to. That's one area that has so much opportunities now.
There are proposals now to regularize or normalize the hybrid system of working. I mean, yung paghahalo ng work from home and on-site reporting. What do you think of those proposals? Some are saying na dapat daw 3 days out of the week or 2 days. What do you think of that?
I hope we don't do that, because the moment you start to get everybody to work more from home, then you reduce mobility, you know? And when you reduce mobility, then that's less economic activity, because remember, these our employees go to work, they ride the public transportation, they ride a tricycle, the angkas, and all of that. So these people are in that business. They eat in a carinderia, and a canteen, a cafeteria. So we need mobility. We need people to go out and spend. No? The moment people stop spending, then our economy will really slow down. So it's a balance. I understand that. And in fact, the Jobs Committee proposed that maybe leave it up to 70-30. But others feel that let the owners decide. For example, in manufacturing firms, we cannot make our people work from home. No, they have to be in the factories, running the equipments and all of that, our R&D, our staff. So it depends on the business that we have. No, maybe the BPOs, yes, but I think they should somehow cap it. No, because if all of them start to work from home, that's a huge number. No, and all these buildings that they were once in, they will be empty, and you will see things slow down. So I think school is great. It has opened, and it's psychological. I mean, the kids not being in school was very challenging. So that is also going to create more economic activity, and that's what we want to see. We want to see people to move, to travel, to go out, to dine in, to eat in restaurants. We have to. That's why I'm saying we have to move forward, and people are learning how to do it. Families are having people take an antigen test before they meet up. Big events, cocktails, most of our events, everybody prior to entering has to be antigen. So people know when to set those protocols, those health protocols.
Yeah, but Mr. Concepcion, I mean, asking for a friend. I mean, you work with a lot of MSMEs and a lot of people at Go Negosyo. And this is a common question for small businesses. I'm not talking about manufacturing where talagang kailangan. Kung kailangan nasa factory, then you don't really have a choice. But there's a whole swath of businesses, as you've acknowledged, where people can create scenarios where they can continue to work from home or maybe find some balance. But ultimately, how do you advise people on what should be our HR policy here? Because on the other hand, the pushback also comes with a reminder that, and a question of, well, who's accountable? I can go to office, but if I get COVID, I mean, does this come with a rebalancing as well, and a reconsideration as well of the accountabilities and responsibilities of the employer, should it come to compelling employees to a certain balance, whatever that balance is?
Well, yes. For example, in our office, there is the number of people are getting COVID. But what we do is we just keep testing people as they enter, and just manage the situation. And I think we have to learn how to live with this situation. The moment we start to retreat and everybody starts to just work from home and all of that, then I think we're going to get into trouble. Yes, because of gasoline prices and fuel prices going up, transportation costs are high.
People are on savings mode.
And
Yes.
right. So we in our company we allow it, but we only allow 1 day out of 5 days now for work from home. but the rest they have to come back to work because you don't. We want to build a team. It's so hard to build a team through Zoom. In fact, my first time to be interviewed by somebody in another station, face to face, it's so different when you are being interviewed face to face rather than in Zoom. Night and day. You tend to be more engaged, more motivated, and I hope, and we have to, I understand that there are people who want to work from home, but it has to be a balance. And that's why our group proposed a 70-30% balance for those PPOs, call centers, and that is our suggestion. And hopefully, we don't lose that mobility, because especially in times like this, you have to generate mobility.
That's fascinating, the insights, especially from your company and the different MSMEs that you work with and that you advise. I'm just curious, what are some other questions, some other things arising on the employer-employee relationship that you would, at the very least, say, that's a legitimate question. That's something that MSMEs, at the very least, can and should be having a conversation about?
Well, we have these mentoring events in the shopping centers, in the malls, and when you talk to the MSMEs, many of them are, desperate. Some of them are looking for ways to really get through this whole crisis. The pandemic was one problem. Rising prices is the next problem now. And of course, the challenges that they face is that they are having to borrow more money because that working capital is shrinking. Because if, for example, the price of wheat was $200 and it went up as high as $500, even our own company technically doubled our working capital. So what more the MSMEs, the canned goods, the soft drinks that they have to buy are now more expensive. So they have to borrow more money. And the challenge there is that the financial institutions are also very careful today, because nobody knows this kind of environment. We've seen the worst with the Asian financial crisis, the US banking crisis. Are we getting into a situation like that? No, and I hope not. And that's why, to me, Roby, the economy has to grow fast, and that is the only way we can get out of this problem.
I think that's clear.
Well, Christmas is fast approaching. Would that be I don't know, will that actually provide us some boost, at least
Definitely.
For now?
Definitely, that's going to be a big plus. It's coming at the right time. The fourth quarter is when many people make 40% of their sales in that 3 months alone. So hopefully there is our healthcare utilization rate stays at 30%, so there is no threat of any lockdown. And this is where people normally recover most of their losses in this last quarter.
Just going back to my question about employers, employees, I'm just curious because obviously you have a lot of insights on how businesses are operating. I wanted to ask also about the other side of that equation, the employees. After 2 years of lockdown and working from home and all of these considerations, is there anything changing in the nature, in the mindset of employees, of potential employees? We've read all about the Great Resignation. We know all about people wanting to work. We've had economists saying that, some people right now are more, the underemployment numbers, for example, are also partly driven by people being a bit more selective. But what are you seeing on the ground? Has there been any change in the mindset, in the attitude, in the lifestyle, in the mentality of employees or potential employees?
Well, we have a lot of people, a very high turnover of people right now. I don't know why. I mean, people just can't stay put. And they're being pirated, so there is a lack of certain skills. So there is more movement now in that sector, and maybe people are just uneasy. They want to try new companies. And so that is a major concern right now that we see. Now, as to what we've seen as people came back, it's a little bit different. No? Not seeing each other for so many months, no? Working from home. So the social aspect is a concern. It takes time to build a team, and you can't build a team in Zoom. It doesn't really work that way. You build a team, seeing each other, having lunch, going out together, building that camaraderie. And working from home just pulls people away. So that is where I see the biggest disadvantage. So companies like us, it's very important, especially for the sales organization, the marketing groups, that they are together, that they see each other every day. It's like a basketball team. You can't play basketball in Zoom. I mean, you have to be there. You have to meet each other. You have to feel each other. You have to go out together and have a drink, and all of that. That is the whole nature. Imagine if your social life as people in the news, you will just be in Zoom and not being able to. It's going to be different. And there are studies about that. Even the doctors have agreed that even the children at the young age are already greatly affected just wearing a mask.
Okay. Mr. Concepcion, maraming salamat po. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Luchi. Thank you, Roby. Good night.
Mr. Joey Concepcion, of course, of Go Negosyo and of the Private Sector Advisory Council. Now we'll start up another conversation immediately after the break. Stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Billion pesos. This was the budget recommended by the Budget Department for the Office of the Vice President for 2023.
Tinuna ng mga mababatas ang nasa 650 million pesos na confidential funds ng dalawang tanggapan.
But a motion to swiftly terminate deliberation was raised by House Minority Leader Marcelino Libana as parliamentary courtesy to the OVP.
While some members of the Makabayan Bloc would like to propound questions on some new items in the budget, they also join us, but rather they will propound questions in the plenary to extend our courtesy to the office of the Vice President.
And if there is anything that we can do to help you as an office in your respective mandates, in your respective legislative districts and party lists, please do let us know. We are open to collaborations in helping our fellow Filipinos.
You're still watching The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama po natin Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5. And budget deliberations, as you saw, were a breeze for the offices of the President and the Vice President. Our next guest says this goes beyond tradition. Welcome to The Chiefs, IBON Foundation Executive Director, Sonny Africa.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Ma'am Luchi,
Yes, Sonny.
Sir Roby.
Now, obviously, we have a lot of questions, and we know, of course, from your Facebook post, marami ka ring, you have a lot of comments. But before we get into that, before we get into specifics, this is a real, sincere question for somebody who obviously knows how to look at these documents much better. How do you look into budgets? Ikaw, when you get the first draft of the budget, this is a big document with a lot of numbers. where do you focus? And where would you tell people to focus? And what are the questions that people should be asking? So at least there's some direction in how we're reviewing documents such as this.
Well, the most important for us is that there's one summary. It's usually, table B5. It summarizes the main sectors and then it details how it's distributed among mga departments. So this is the famous one na how much for education, for housing, agriculture, economic services, and all of that. So I think that's number one. But we actually think it's underutilized to also look at the financing because it actually matters how they're generating the revenues and how much they're borrowing for that. So that's super quick, concise summary of the sectors and departments, how it's divided per sector, and then the financing aspect, and of course, how much is going to be borrowed.
Okay, so now super quick, concise insights. What do you think of this budget proposal?
It's super not what we need right now. I think the bottom line is the economy is not recovering, growth is slowing, people are having a really hard time dealing with the aftershocks of the lockdowns. So we would have liked to have seen a budget that gave more attention to immediate ayuda, emergency cash assistance, and also support for small producers, both micro, small, and medium enterprises, but also agricultural producers. Unfortunately, we did see a bit of a change in the agricultural budget, I think because the president is the one on top of that. But ultimately, there was too little given to ayuda, too little given to MSMEs, which were cut, not enough for health, education, housing, and this crazy misprioritization of infrastructure, debt service, the president's budget, and the vice president's budget. It's not a very humane or, I think, sensitive budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, you took special note of the 1,000-fold and 6-fold increases in the budgets of the Office of the President and the Office of the Vice President. And in particular, what was noted was how they were passed very quickly. And as a matter of courtesy, that's how they would refer to it. Can you give us the context for this courtesy? Is this really a tradition that, to give due courtesy to these high offices, we will just, let it be? Ganun ba talaga yun?
Well, courtesy, I think, how Philippine politics is, there's always a euphemism for things. I think courtesy is basically out of fear because all budgets are really by design under the control of the president, even the budget of Congress, which supposedly has the power of the purse. So I think what is called politely as courtesy, I think a bit of deference and cowardice because no legislator wants to be in the wrong side of the president. And in this case, of the vice president because of the nature of the political alliance between Sara Duterte and Bongbong Marcos. So I think that has been that quote-unquote tradition in the past. It's completely misguided. It completely takes away the sense of oversight that Congress should have over the budget, which is mainly implemented by the executive. But it's one of many things I think we have to reform in the budget process, especially giving undue power to the president.
How much of that, though, will be balanced out in the plenary? Or maybe even in the BICAM, because it'll get to that. That's how they justify it. Na parang, marami pang dadaanan yan. So, uuliratin pa rin naman yan.
Well, actually, the committee hearings for us are the most important because that's exactly where people can engage and opposition lawmakers supposedly have a better chance of interpellating the sponsor. Once it comes to the plenary, the momentum is already there. So actually, very little happens in the plenary after things are passed at the committee level. So the claim that there is at least the plenary to talk about that, in practice, that's not really going to happen, and much less will it happen in the BICAM, which is the most opaque, most untransparent body in the budget-making process. So I think the fact that, for instance, it only took so many minutes for the budgets of the president and the office of the vice president to be passed, with no space given to opposition lawmakers, the handful there. I think that's a sign of how Congress will be exercising its budget-making powers in the plenary and in the BICAM, and especially its oversight powers when it's actually implemented in 2023, which means no real oversight and a blank check to the president, and in this case, the vice president.
Can you be a bit more specific or concrete in that statement that, you know, from the committee to the BICAM to the plenary, nothing really changes? I mean, in the past budgets, can you put a percentage on the deviation, if any, or however little it goes from having gone to the committee on to the plenary?
Okay. The biggest constraint to budget making is that you can never increase the budget beyond what was already submitted. So any sort of changes will be a change within that pie. And when that happens, actually, after the committee level, the reason we think that it's so important to get discussion going at the committee level, because that's where the public has the biggest chance to actually get their representatives to intervene. That's when you can actually start being critical about whether one department has too much or too little money. The thing is, once you get to the plenary, the tone is set by what happened in the committee level. If you didn't have any controversy at the committee level, it's so hard to expect that there will be any controversies at the plenary level. Of course, it's on occasion, a legislator can stand up and say that they have some comments, but the momentum is actually, the direction is set at the committee level. And the worst thing actually is at the bicameral conference committee level, because at that level, you basically have the chosen leaders, of course, very beholden to the executive, sitting in a dark room somewhere in early December. You know, everyone's in the Christmas spirit, giving and horse trading. I think that is the most untransparent portion of the budget process. Are there changes? On occasion, there have been changes. There have been previous years when you had, for instance, some increase in the health budget or the education budget, with some adjustments maybe in infrastructure agencies. But again, the direction is set at the committee level. I can't recall any real changes being initiated at the level of plenary debates.
So if you were to put it in terms of percentages, how much of what was approved on the committee level is actually carried when it gets to, well, plenary and BICAM?
I'd be very surprised with any budget after having gone through the House of Representatives and Senate. I'd be very surprised if there's any more than a 10% deviation across budget items. So there's really very little happening. And I think, you know, Ma'am Luchi and I were talking earlier, sometimes you kind of wonder, what's the point of engaging in the budget process? Maybe not necessarily to change the budget, although we can try for that. But I think the important thing during the budget season is to educate people that this is taxpayers' money and they do actually have a right to intervene. It might be very difficult right now. There's so many barriers, but I think the public education part of intervening in the budget process for us right now is actually quite important.
Okay, so educate us about confidential funds. How exactly is that implemented? What exactly are the big questions that you think people should be asking of the Office of the President, of the Office of the Vice President, and for that matter, Congress, that is giving them these record level of confidential funds?
Well, I think right now, the news reports about this incredible 500 million peso increase in confidential funds in the Office of the Vice President. I think that is the biggest question right now. It raises the question of why does the Vice President need such a big confidential fund, but also it coming on top of a lot of direct services that is not really in the purview of the Vice President. There's at least 900 million also added to the Office of the Vice President for financial assistance and subsidies. It seems too much like a patronage budget and sort of a black budget for the Office of the Vice President right now. And of course, that is the case also with the Office of the President. But I think the new thing right now is that the Vice President, I don't recall there ever being a time that the Office of the Vice President had so much more weight than the President in terms of increasing their budgets.
Neither do we.
Well, to be sure, she was pointing out parang vulnerabilities of the youth, no, of children. For example, that they become victims of sexual grooming, and then of course other stuff like mental health, and so on and so forth, for which she feels there has to be, deep investigation and police and security operations. No, don't you think that that's justified? It being part of her mandate to take care of school children.
I think the government, of course, should be taking care of issues like that. But the question is it the mandate of the Office of the Vice President? The DSWD is there, the DepEd is also there, which she actually also heads. I think if there's anything that needs to be bolstered in terms of direct services, it really is not the Office of the Vice President. And I think one very striking thing about this huge increase in the Vice President's budget, it really is a black budget, this 500 million peso confidential fund. It really is a patronage budget because of this at least 900 million increase in direct subsidies that we can give. And if you actually also consider how being at the helm of the DepEd, there was an incredible 24 or 25 billion increase in government subsidies for senior high school students, for the voucher program. Again, you combine all that, you actually have, I think right now, an unprecedented, basically patronage fund that will be attributed and that will make the Vice President quite popular, at least in the coming year.
When you say patronage fund, basically pork barrel fund?
Pretty much, yes. Pork barrel, maybe not in the sense that it's not yet going to identified purposes, but patronage in the sense that if the DepEd, for instance, builds school buildings or increases teacher salaries, that impact gets diffused. But to be giving the current Vice President and current Secretary of Department of Education an incredible 55 billion pesos, I think, in terms of government financial subsidies, direct subsidies to families, and that's going to be attributed to her. I think that does reinforce a culture of patronage politics at the DepEd in terms of giving out these subsidies for children to be able to go to high school. Necessary, of course, but again, it's quite suspicious. And then put on top of that, the 900 million pesos literally at the Office of the Vice President to be giving liberally financial assistance. I think it's very much of a patronage character more than a service character.
Okay, one final quick question, just on confidential funds, and then we have time still for a couple of more things. But how confidential is confidential? You know, we've reported so many times that this walang check and balance dito, and there's no actual reporting. But how literally do we take that?
Technically, the COA still has a mandate over the funds, and technically, Congress can call an executive session and have the president, the vice president, the military reveal how the confidential funds were used. So, in practice, those mechanisms which are there in principle actually have not tended to be used, or if they have been tended to be used only in a very token manner, because those actually asking are on the good side of the president or the military anyway. So the most important thing about confidential fund is that it is the only budget item that is literally prevented from being disclosed publicly. That's why it's so dangerous if you have the regulators regulating themselves. I mean, who watches the Watchmen? If you have fishy people watching each other, I think there's a lot of fishy transactions happening there, unfortunately. And I think that's why it's so important that the way the Office of the Vice President budget was passed so quickly, I think that's a good sign and a good indication of the kind of oversight, meaning none, that Congress will give over this unprecedented budget.
Apart from the confidential budgets, however, pwede bang himayin mo yung mga so far na dinig na or nasimulan na ang pagdinig, no? Halimbawa, Public Works, I know, naumpisa na, no? Health rin, naumpisa na. And of course, DepEd nga, no? Kasabay ng OVP. So far, what are your observations of the budget?
Okay. Our general observation really has to come from it is not sensitive to the needs of people right now. The fact that emergency assistance was cut by 43 billion pesos, again, the Secretary of Finance really said that ayuda is a waste of funds. The fact that MSC support was cut by almost 2 billion pesos, while there was still an increase in infrastructure of 18 billion pesos, an increase in the Office of the President's budget of almost 800 million, in the Vice President, an increase of 2.3 billion, and in debt servicing of principal and interest of 340 billion, the priorities are not there. The budget is too small to stimulate the economy. I think that's quite important. It doesn't even keep up with inflation. It's a 4.9% budget increase. Inflation right now is targeted at 5.4% for 2022. So it doesn't even keep up with inflation, so it doesn't stimulate the economy. Secondly, even the priorities are in items of least multiplier effect, least social benefit. And again, I think too patronage heavy, too pork heavy.
When you talk about the ayuda, for example, yung libreng sakay, paulit-ulit yan eh. Do you think, halimbawa, that we should continue with that? Is that a worthwhile ayuda to give?
I think right now, the ayuda program started in 2020. We're actually in the right direction. They were giving cash assistance to needy families. They were giving cash assistance to informal workers. They were giving cash assistance to displaced OFWs. The fact that those three budget items were cut massively, I think, is a problem. The government does want to make a big thing about the libreng sakay, the fuel subsidies to farmers, fisherfolk, and drivers. But if you look at the numbers, they're reaching only a small percentage of those in need. So it seems to be a public relations gimmick more than anything else, because if you look at the magnitudes, the numbers really fall far short of those needing those kinds of subsidies.
Okay. The final question, you made a point earlier, an early point in fact, that the other important thing to look at is the financing as well. What are your concerns on that side?
Our main concern on that side is the government has put itself in a fiscal straitjacket by refusing to increase taxes on those most able to pay, whether it's a billionaire wealth tax or corporate income tax or high-income families. It has tied itself on the revenue front to a very small revenue increase. It is still borrowing a lot, and that has actually constrained it from spending more on ayuda, social services, the range of social protection, and even actually the social infrastructure needed. And I think that is a problem, because if the government thinks that it will always get enough money from poor and ordinary Filipinos to pay for its government spending, it will never be enough. It has to really rethink who it taxes if it really wants to raise more revenues, to genuinely expand social services, social protection, and actually economic support to distressed families and producers.
Okay, Mr. Africa, maraming salamat. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Sir Roby.
Sonny.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sonny Africa is Executive Director of IBON Foundation, and that is it for this edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Roby Alampay.
I'm Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5.
We are One News. All sides, all the time.